since the ceasefire, what sort of discourse is happening now between Gaza and Israel?
Well, it's largely the PA and Israel that would be having that discourse, and Egypt.
So it's the PA in West Bank talking to Israel about Gaza?
Yes. So one of the things that had happened before was the unity government, obviously, between the PA and Fatah and unity agreement. Seeing how that's actually panned out on the ground, the only difference that I can see in Gaza is that when you now go through the crossing in Erez, you have your passport checked by the PA at one point, and then you go a bit further and you have it checked by Hamas at another one. So ultimately, why Omar, his quote was saying, you know, what about these two governments? There are two forms of control going on in Gaza. There is an agreement. What Hamas has done is said that they will take an absolute back. They're not going to say anything about reconstruction. They don't want to intervene in that at all because the important thing is that materials should come through. So the main locus is with the PA. And the main action that's coming from the UN is a plan in which the UN would monitor everything that comes in with the cooperation of the Palestinian Authority. The problem with that is it both legitimizes and in a way polices the blockade, and the UN will be doing that job as well. So this is the big issue. There isn't, although the ceasefire is holding, there isn't an appetite for further fighting, I don't think. There isn't political progress. And certainly not conversation between Israel and Hamas.
Is Israel helping with the reconstruction at all?
Well, the US have just said that they should help with the reconstruction. One of the big things that Palestinian organizations and civil society are saying is that it's very important they don't profit out of the reconstruction. So they're very keen that the kinds of reconstruction process that happens is going to be working with Palestinian materials and using that as a way to boost the Palestinian economy from the West Bank and Gaza in order to try and get something out of it. But there is a concern that actually what will happen will be that Israel will profit out of having destroyed and rebuilt if they're involved in that process.
What's the current state of NGO access into Gaza, just generally speaking?
It's difficult. I was very lucky to be able to get in. It helps if you are already a part of the system. So having worked and gone in before, it was easier for me from a permit to be renewed. It's very difficult for organisations that don't have a history there to then get involved. It's very difficult for the organisations that do have a history to get involved. But there isn't any clear guidance on that at all. It just sort of you try and get as many workers as you can to be able to access. But
so is there any kind of higher, so is the UN facilitating any access or anything like that into
it's not really the UN that facilitates. I mean, you have to apply to, in order to get in, you either have the Egyptian route or you have the Israeli route.
Right.
The Egyptian route has been very, very tough, and they stop convoys from getting in. They stop medical convoys from getting in as well. So that has been extremely difficult. They have now allowed getting in, but it's certainly not working in the way that it did in 2008 and 2009, where both medical personnel and other humanitarian workers were able to access, and also patients were able to go out via that way. This time, the majority of it has been via Erez into Israel, and particularly the patients as well.
Just more follow-up, you kind of touched it on in your talk, but with the groups that are on the ground, you talked about how there's some kind of frustration there with the people towards kind of the West in general. Is there any animosity to those groups who are out there trying to help, just in general terms?
Not that I witnessed. I mean, I would have thought they would, personally I would have thought there would be more, and I'm always astounded by how welcomed I have felt whenever I'm there. But I think there is wariness, certainly, over some issues, particularly because there have been a number of reporters that have behaved in a certain way that made it quite difficult for them to stay, I think. But I think people just want to be able to drive forward reconstruction on their own, and that there is a huge problem with international aid, which is basically, if it shores up the occupation, then yes, of course it's a problem for people. But at the same time, you know, people were very keen for people to see what was happening. So I didn't have that personal experience.
Thank you.
That's as best as I can answer.
Yeah.
Lit up. Any other questions? I feel like I should think of a really good joke or something.
Why isn't Gaza obtaining the attention of the world leaders? Why there's no donations, there's no help?
Well, that's a big question.
Like when it comes to a different country, everyone runs and helps. Why is it when it comes to Gaza, it's a different story?
Well, I don't know if it is a different story. I think if you think about what's happened in Iraq and the lack of interest that has been there over the last few years until now, if you look at various things, I'm not sure it is an absolute special case. I also think that